There's no worse feeling as a mid laner than getting into Champion Select, picking a standard mage as your champion of choice, and then the other side picks something incredibly unfun, like Fizz or Irelia. You know the laning phase is about to be absolutely miserable for you, and there's nothing you'd rather do than dodge the game. Against Fizz, you know you're supposed to shut him down early, but it feels like he just dodges your main ability with his E, and then one-shots you in one combo with zero counterplay. As for Irelia, she's supposedly this high skill cap champion that takes forever to master, but she literally just Qs your entire wave and right-clicks you to death. That totally takes skill. Yup. We know that these are two of the most frustrating matchups in the game for mid laners who play mages like honorable people should. Not to worry though, in this guide we're going to show you how to easily counter both of them in lane. After this, you'll no longer groan in agony when you see them in Champion Select, but you'll instead rejoice at the free win you're about to get. But before we get into it, be sure to check out Skill Capped if you want to truly get better at League of Legends. We're the only service that offers a money-back guarantee if you don't climb at least 5 divisions while actively using our service. We do this because our service really does work, and if it doesn't work for you, you shouldn't pay. Learn more at the end of this video or click the link in the description below. Let's get into it. Let's start with the easier one of the two to beat, Fizz. First, we'll review a low elo game of a Victor versus Fizz to show you what you need to avoid doing in lane. And afterwards, we'll show you how a higher elo player handles the matchup to make Fizz look like a horrible champion. There's a simple strategy you need to follow to beat Fizz almost every single time. Remember that Fizz can only farm and trade with you in melee range. When you're playing a typical mid laner, you should have control over the wave with your range advantage, so you'll want to use that to build a minion lead. This will put Fizz into an impossible situation. With your wave advantage, you'll want to harass him every time he walks up to last hit a minion. There's nothing he can do about that because if he tries to trade, he'll most likely lose from the massive disadvantage of fighting in a big wave during the early game. That's it. It sounds way too simple to be true, but this is why Fizz is nearly unplayable in high elo and non-existent in competitive play at the moment. There's literally nothing he can do in a lot of cases if his opponent is playing well. But like we said, let's show you just how overpowered Fizz looks when you don't actually punish his biggest weakness. Getting into this laning phase, take a look at what Victor does first before we break it down. That was clearly awful, but it's one of the most common mistakes we see versus Fizz. The problem likely stems from the fact that players know they have to shut him down. Everyone tells you that you need to beat Fizz early, but no one tells you how. So players make ridiculous mistakes they normally wouldn't make out of some weird sense of urgency. Fizz thrives on punishing mistakes, and this Victor is breaking the most basic of all rules around trading, which is to fight around minion waves early on. He's walking into the enemy wave, which gives Fizz the opportunity to E and slow him. This forces Victor to tank a lot of extra minion damage, which is why this trade was so awful. While that first mistake isn't great, the rest of what this low elo Victor is about to do is even worse. Remember that your goal should be to harass Fizz whenever he walks up to last hit, because he's a vulnerable melee champion. To show you how bad players are at this, we're going to keep track of every single opportunity Victor missed in this lane to harass Fizz. Right after that level 1 trade, Fizz still has his E down, so when he walks up to auto-attack this caster minion for no reason, Victor should be auto-attacking and queuing him whenever possible. That's one timing miss so far. The next time Fizz autos here is technically fine. Fizz's counterplay to being bullied is to go for last hits when his opponent also has a minion to last hit. Therefore, while Victor was busy farming, he isn't able to punish. But after that, Fizz goes for this final auto to get the last hit on the minion, which goes completely unpunished for some reason. Unfortunately, because Victor hasn't put a single ounce of pressure so far, his wave is mostly dead. This means that as Fizz hits this minion, Victor can't harass. Otherwise, Fizz could just jump on him without a wave to protect him. But right then is when Victor's reinforcing wave arrives. This means that for Fizz's next auto on the minion, Victor could have been in position to harass yet again. Coming after that is 1, 2, and 3 unpunished Fizz auto attacks on the wave. Victor has somehow let a Fizz hit level 2 before him from all these mistakes. And to emphasize an important concept, these are just the windows of opportunity he's missing in these specific moments. He would have way more chances to punish if he was actually playing well. It's a pressure creates more pressure type of lane, if that makes sense. A few moments later, and we get 2 more windows of opportunity thrown away. We'll fast forward a bit here, as Fizz kept moving in and out of lane to maybe join that jungle fight, so not much happens. But as he finally commits to laning again, we can already see yet another unpunished auto attack, and then a final auto goes unpunished as Fizz hits level 3. Let's review all the reasons why this is a massive failure by Victor. He's missed 10 opportunities to harass Fizz, which means he's level 3 with nearly full HP. Not only that, but he somehow has 2 potions to work with still. And on top of all that, he's somehow down a level in a matchup he should be winning early. Sometimes you're going to mess up and get into these kinds of situations, but if you do, you need to remember that it's Fizz's time to shine now. As most mages, you'll want to keep your range and try to play from outside of his Q's range, so he can't engage on you for free. Not only that, but you should top yourself off with potions so that he can't kill you in one combo. Victor does neither of these things. He sits on 3 potions and walks up to get full comboed by Fizz. Needless to say, he dies instantly and he's managed to make Fizz look like a decent champion. Okay, that was a bit embarrassing. Let's show you what the lane should actually look like with an example from a Grandmaster's ELO game in the same matchup. And remember that not only will the Victor be much better, but the enemy Fizz is infinitely more competent than the Fizz we just watched as well. At the start of the lane, notice how Victor isn't hitting the wave needlessly. You want to push the wave as slowly as you can. This will give you more and more time to harass Fizz in the long run. Fizz is immediately forced to use his E to last hit some of the early minions just to avoid any harass, which is what will usually happen at the start of the game every single time in high elo. And notice just how different this lane looks. Fizz isn't getting to auto attack the wave for free at all, unlike the previous example. When he does go to last hit though, Victor is in position to actually punish him for doing so. Otherwise, Fizz is just playing really far back. This is actually what Fizz is supposed to do when played correctly. He should be going down 15 to 20 CS and saving his health so he has a chance of coming back later into the lane. Your opponents are unlikely to have that discipline, and you should be harassing them for every CS they go for. Tired of being zoned though, Fizz is a bit desperate to trade back onto Victor, but this is exactly what you should be looking for as the mage. Victor calmly kites back to his minions and just begins hitting Fizz. In predictable manner, Fizz is getting owned here. He can't stick around to fight at such a minion deficit early on, so he just has to retreat. And the entire time he's running away, he's taking more and more harass. This simple strategy continues for a while. Victor maintains a big wave to help keep him safe, and he harasses Fizz every time he walks up for a last hit, while there's nothing Fizz can do about it. Now, we're aware of a common concern if you try to pull this off in your games though. You're just going to be ganked. Luckily, this Victor knows that's a possibility and understands how to avoid ganks entirely. When you're pushing aggressively versus your opponent, remember to ward one side of the river and then stand on that side of the lane. This keeps you safe from almost all ganks. If the enemy jungler comes from the side you've warded, you can easily react and walk away. Or if they come from your unwarded side, then you have so much time to react and simply walk away as well. What this means is that Fizz will have no reprieve from your constant harass. This is precisely why Fizz is such a bad champion. Not only is his early laning incredibly hard to pull off in high elo, but he gets outscaled by most mages as well. He's a champion that needs to get ahead, but shouldn't be able to in most games. And although you may not be able to kill him as a mage, you should still be able to push him out of lane to deny him farm and experience, which is already a massive win. A couple of minutes later, and we can see the fruits of Victor's early pressure come to fruition. He's got a level lead from before and uses that advantage to push Fizz out of lane yet again, and it's a complete disaster of a game for Fizz. Hopefully you could see just how different a game that was from the previous one. You don't even have to play nearly as well as this Victor did to punish lower elo Fizz players. If you just follow a basic game plan of punishing him every time he last hits and playing with a big wave, then you're going to stomp almost every Fizz you go up against. With that matchup down, let's move on to the more frustrating of the two champs we'll be covering today, Irelia. Unlike Fizz, Irelia is played very often in higher elos, but this doesn't mean that she isn't just as easy to beat as Fizz is. You may not want to hear this, but Irelia does take a lot of skill to pull off and win consistently on, which is why no one will ever recommend her to you if you're serious about climbing. But the reason she looks so oppressive and easy is because most players just hand themselves over on a silver platter for her to kill. We want to compare Irelia to a champion like Annie. Would you call Annie overpowered if you just walked into range for her to full combo you? Probably not. She deserves to kill you if you mess up like that. And that's why Annie is incredibly rare to see in higher elos. She's outranged by almost every mage in the game, so it's impossible for her to get her combo off versus good players. Now, while Irelia may be frustrating, she has a similar weakness to Annie, especially in mid lane. She can only kill you if you mess up your wave or positioning and allow her to do what makes her look so overpowered. Let's show you what we mean with another low elo example. Once again, we've got a standard mage, Syndra versus Irelia. There's two things you can do with the wave versus Irelia. Against melee champs, you usually want to be the one pushing into them early on, as we saw in the Fizz section of this guide. While that works, it can backfire versus Irelia for reasons we'll cover soon. The other would be to let her push into you and take a slightly more defensive approach. Let's first cover the number one mistake players make when choosing to push versus Irelia. At the start of the lane, Syndra plays very aggressively, punishing her weak level 1. While your main goal doing so is to punish her last hits just like you would with Fizz, you should be careful about harassing too much on the first 3 minions. The first 3 melee minions all die at around the same time, which means that Irelia can get 3 stacks of her passive instantly. While you normally punish these last hits against other melee mid laners, Syndra was correct to play back here. If she was in range, Irelia would Q into her and deal massive damage with her passive fully stacked. But now is where one of Irelia's big weaknesses becomes apparent. After those initial 3 passive stacks fall off, she is no longer a threat at all. Now you should really be playing in her face and punishing her every time she tries to last hit a minion. Syndra surprisingly did this fairly well for a lower elo player, and notice the result. Irelia can't maintain her passive for very long, so she continues to be completely harmless. There's definitely been a few things this Syndra hasn't done properly, but for the most part, this should be how the lane looks in most of your games. It's very easy to shut down Irelia early as most mages. But here's where so many players mess up. Syndra goes to ward and leaves lane for a moment. Against most champions, this would be fine, but not versus Irelia. Remember what we've been harping on about? By pressuring her in lane, Irelia can't freely stack up her passive, but if you give her time on her own, she'll stack it up for free, and that's a big problem. Syndra should have just placed a shallow ward around here so she could have kept pressuring, but instead, she's staring down an Irelia with 3 passive stacks. This is the danger moment we mentioned earlier when you choose to push versus Irelia. If you mess up and find yourself in this situation, you need to be very careful. If you can't pressure her stacks off, then you need to crash the wave as quickly as possible. Not only that, but reserve your CC spells to peel for yourself if Irelia goes in. These are abilities like Ahri's Charm, Lux's Binding, Zoe's Bubble, etc. Obviously, this means that you don't randomly throw out your stun like this Syndra does, giving Irelia literally everything she wants. Let's look at all the conditions met for what's coming next. The wave is on Irelia's side of the lane, giving her a ton of room to chase down and make use of her insane DPS. She's got her passive nearly stacked, and her opponent even walks towards a low health minion, which gives Irelia a Q reset right next to Syndra. We're not saying Irelia can't be absurd sometimes, but you cannot blame the champion if you play this way. This is again the equivalent of walking up to an Annie to be full comboed and then saying Annie is overpowered. Of course, Irelia will kill you when you give her the absolute perfect setup for her to do so. Just like before, let's take a look at this matchup played by 2 Grandmaster ELO players now. And we'll just mention this again, the following Irelia is significantly better than the previous one, and all the players you'll be facing in your games. At the start of the lane, Syndra walks past the wave and looks to harass Irelia. This is something we don't recommend you do until you get much more experience and you know in which matchups you can pull this off. As Syndra, it works because her Q's cooldown is pretty short. Therefore, if Irelia jumps in with her Q, then the trade will go fairly evenly, which is overall good for Syndra in the long run. After that, Syndra tries to use her range advantage to really harass the Irelia and zone her off the first wave. Sadly, she misses her Q, so Irelia is less pressured than she should be. To try and guarantee that her next Q will land, Syndra uses a pretty good trick that you should learn to land skill shots versus Irelia. They almost always Q to low health minions to last hit them and get stacks of their passive. So Syndra places her Q on top of her own minion right as it's about to die in order to predict Irelia dashing there. Sadly, Irelia saw this coming and timed it perfectly to avoid Syndra's harass. Okay, remember those 2 game plans we covered at the start? There was one to push and one to let the wave come into you. Syndra initially played this lane with the intention to push and was playing very aggressively to try and make that happen, but she misplayed and missed some spells, whereas the enemy Irelia played well. As a result, she's lost a lot of pressure, so instead she'll adapt and let Irelia push into her. No big deal. You don't have to play perfectly to win. Like we mentioned previously, Irelia is at her best when she can go for a long trade on you with her passive, but this is why she's much less threatening in mid lane. The lane is significantly shorter than top lane, which means that she has a lot less opportunities to go for long trades, especially when the wave is around here. Notice how Syndra is able to harass her with impunity, since Irelia isn't able to go for an extended fight with Syndra so close to her tower. It's important to note that you may be tempted to throw your CC ability at this timing. We'd caution you in doing so whenever Irelia is dashing all over the wave to push. If you miss from her constant juking around, then you'll lose a lot of pressure. Only throw it when you're confident it'll land. Anyway, we've reached the conclusion for this lane. As Irelia finished killing all the minions, Syndra walks forward and Irelia dashes in. With a well-played combo from Syndra, Irelia goes down just 2 minutes into the lane. This may have seemed like a really silly play from Irelia that the players in your games would never do, but it was actually because she had already lost the lane from her previous actions and Syndra was about to checkmate her. If you didn't catch it, Syndra was walking up to tank this wave for a moment because her incoming wave is right here. If Irelia doesn't stop Syndra from freezing this, then the wave would crash like this. Whenever you're letting Irelia push into you, this should be one of your main goals for the wave. Think about Irelia's perspective if the wave is like this. What can she do? There's nothing, right? She can't engage, and it's really hard for her to keep pushing if you just freely harass her from the safety of your tower. That's why this Irelia was so desperate to fight here. She realized she messed up and went for a last-ditch effort to keep the wave from crashing like that because she knew she would lose anyway. A very similar wave state actually happened in the lane after that initial kill. Look how frustrating this looks for Irelia to play. She can't do anything and she's clumsily trying to crash. Not only that, but keeping the wave here is great for jungle ganks as well. Irelia is very easy to gank as she has no backwards mobility. Shaco comes to punish her and this Irelia has been easily shut down. Hopefully these games have shown you just how vulnerable these two champions are in mid lane. Fizz is almost unplayable versus good players because he's so easily punished during the early stages of the game and he should never be able to get going. Meanwhile, Irelia can look absolutely ridiculous when everything goes right for her, but that's so hard to pull off consistently in mid lane. The lane is so short that it's rare that she gets those perfect situations to come up unless you really messed up somehow. Keep these tips in mind and you will be crushing these matchups in no time. Alright guys, before we wrap this up, let's tell you a little more about skill caps. So, we offer a 5-division rank up guarantee and think that's a pretty crazy thing to offer. It's like a gym membership guaranteeing you'll get ripped. Your local gym would go bust if they offered that, right? Not us. We've offered this for years because our service really does work. It works so well, in fact, that we're able to produce by far the largest catalog of premium league guides on the internet. We add over 20 videos a week with over 1,600 guides curated into over 100 courses no one can compare. We've also sent challenger players into ELO Hell 714 times and counting, where they commentate how to carry live. They also respond to all questions asked. Sign up today for as little as $6.99 a month if you are serious about improving. Anyway, thanks for watching, and see you next time.